Hey there, hope all is well. Back at you today with some more RT News updates. And as you tell from today's title, Australian government considers microchipping cash. I'm going to be talking about how this gentleman here, Michael Andrew, has proposed the idea of installing microchips in $50 and $100 notes in Australia to kind of keep track on where the money's going, trying to weed out some of the monies that's been stashed away in, as they say, pensioners' mattresses, as well as those that are hoarding money, as they call it, and bring it back into the economy just because their government is in need of extra revenue. So I got about 6 articles I'm going to dive into. And as always, I'm going to leave the links down below for you to dive into them further. And also, if you're new to RTD, click the subscribe button for more RTD News updates, as well as interviews, as well as hit that little bell button there so you'll be notified when the next update or interview is done. Other than that, let's dive into today's news. So as I mentioned, I have 6 articles dealing with the current situation in Australia with the whole idea of banning cash or removing cash or adding notes to cash. So right now there's a department called the Black Economy Task Force implemented by the Australian government, ran by this gentleman right here, Michael Andrews. And so this past week, him and his board got together and came up with several different proposals of which they will be reporting to the government in October. In regards to how they can combat the idea of an illegal economy where people only use cash. And as they say, it's because they're not reporting on their taxes. And so I have a couple articles here dealing with, how that all plays out and just some of the thoughts of the people from the mainstream news in our country, but also just give an idea of kind of where governments stand at this point, where everyone's kind of strapped for cash. No one's really borrowing. There's not much disposable income from families. And so credit usage isn't really what it used to be. And so people are starting to save more, and saving in an economy is very deflationary, which is why the government really needs to kind of get people to spend and pull some of this money out of the mattresses, as they say, to put it into the economy, get things rolling a little bit. So there's going to be more governments going to implement, things such as this nature, whether it be the whole concept of going cashless or just strictly using digital that's reported, or nano-chips, or whatever it may be. So let's get into today's articles. And the very first one, I want to talk about the whole Black Economy Task Force in general. So that's going to be the first one. And then the next article here is from, let me scroll up a little bit. It's from the Sydney Morning Herald, and it says, "No more cash wages, says Black Economy Task Force." The next one here is from the Sydney Morning as well, and it is entitled, "Some ethnic groups predisposed to deal in cash, says Black Economy Task Force paper is kind of, it's wrong." And then the next one here deals with the whole idea of a cash crackdown. Boss floats nano-chips in notes, and this was as of a couple weeks ago. And then the very last one here is also from the Courier Mail, and it says here that Australia's $100 notes to be tracked to help fight organized crime and cash for work economy. So that's kind of how they're spinning this off. So let's get into the very first one and briefly give an idea of what this whole Black Economy Task Force is. And it says the Black Economy Task Force has been established to develop an innovative, forward-looking, whole-of-a-government policy response to combat the black economy in Australia. And so if you're not familiar with the whole black economy, it's something that was also highlighted in India when they basically tried to crack down on the same things there. People just solely using cash and kind of going around reporting it to the government in regards to taxation and how it's being used. And so they paint it as a crime, and it encourages illegal activity because the government can't see it or know exactly what people are doing with their property, which is, technically their cash. And so here it says the black economy refers to people who operate entirely outside the tax and regulatory system, or who are known to the authorities but do not correctly report their tax obligations. And it says the task force is chaired by Michael Andrew. This gentleman here says former global head of KPMG and current chair of the Board of Taxation. It says Mr. Andrew is a former chair of the Australian B20 working group on anti-corruption and transparency, and is also a global CEO forum. So that's the kind of idea that this task force that was put in place and ran by Michael Andrews. And so he's come up with a couple of proposals that he will present before the government there on what to do. So the very next article, the Sydney Morning Herald, says no more cash wages, says Black Economy Task Force. Give you an idea of what's going on here, then I'll scroll through and let you know. And other than that, if you want to read more, feel free to read down below. It says Australians will no longer be able to receive wages in cash, and in industries classified as being a high risk of illegally taking secret cash in hand payments, including cafes, restaurants, could be subject to a minimum rate of tax, which they could claim a refund on if they can prove to the tax man that they should be paying a lower tax rate. And so it says these are some of the options being explored by the federal government's Black Economy Task Force, which also includes naming and shaming tax evaders and replacing $100 notes with new ones to ensure their authenticity. So here it shows a couple bills here. And give you an idea what's going on, it says on Tuesday of this past week, it says the task force released a consultation paper that canvasses a number of additional policy ideas to tackle an estimated $15 billion in lost federal tax revenue and illegitimate welfare payments due to widespread cash economy activity. So right then and there, they're kind of trying to let you know that, they're losing out on $15 billion possibly, of which they're going to find out ways of how to get some of that back into their system. And it says here in one of the articles about how to better support welfare programs and how to fund some government things that need to be done. And so they're trying to paint that idea of holding cash as something that should be considered a shame and is unpatriotic to hold cash, when actually cash was given to us as part of our, it's part of our physical property for the most part, even though it's not owned by the people. It's worked and owned and saved by the people for, the purpose of, doing business. But anyway, it says Basic Economy Task Force Chair Michael Andrew, who has previously described Australians taking cash-only payments and not declaring it as almost a national sport, has been holding industry roundtables and public forums across the nation. Scroll down a little bit. It says a minimum tax rate. It says one more controversial options in the consultation paper includes setting a floor under the tax businesses pay. In some other countries, high risk businesses may be subject to a rule of thumb tax assessments. We understand that in Spain, for example, restaurants are taxed according to the number of employees they have. It says while the task force did not support this particular approach for Australia, the paper raises the idea of an alternative minimum tax for high risk sector. So basically, all the jobs that people receive tips and things like that, they're going to tax them more, assuming that there's a lot of tax or those tips and cash being earned is not reported. So they'll generate a basic level of a fee through taxation, and then it'll be up to the businesses and those receiving tips to then file and report and let them know exactly how much they made to see if they can minimize some of that additional tax. Interesting stuff there. If you're interested, feel free to read down below for more. It says the next one here, some ethnic groups are predisposed to dealing cash, says Black Economy Task Force paper. So here it talks about refugees, those who are coming in the country and aren't authorized or citizens. They're the ones that are more likely to deal with cash just because they can't really file taxes because they're probably there illegally. So I'll share with you what they say about that here. It says refugees will be able to work while waiting decisions on their refugee status under a proposal by a government task force, which says barring them from working increases the propensity for illegal cash economy activity. It says student visa holders could be allowed to work more than 40 hours a fortnight to avoid the same problem in an option canvas in a constitutional paper released this week by federal government's Black Economy Task Force. Says the task force headed by this guy here, Michael Andrew, also called on business, professional bodies, and ethnic and religious community leaders to suggest ways for governments could reshape cultural norms that have led to illegal cash economy activity becoming almost a national sport. So basically what he's doing, he's trying to call upon religious leaders and things of that nature to help come up with different ideas on how they can begin to change people's mindsets on how they view cash from a cultural standpoint. And so I'm assuming there's different ethnic groups that only deal in cash and those that don't really have bank accounts and things like that. And so they want to kind of get into their mind and get them thinking beyond using cash and getting them into the banking system so they can use, digital ledgers and things of that nature so that it'll help the government track down some of this activity. And they're kind of trying to point the idea of refugees being the ones that are kind of, egging this along and foreigners in general. So more information down below if you're interested in reading it. The next one here says cash crackdown boss floats nano-chips in notes. So here we have the idea. This is just one of the things mentioned as something that could be a possibility moving ahead if they don't decide to go cashless completely or remove some of the higher denomination notes. It says the man charged with cracking down on the black economy has revealed how he would keep track of your $150 notes. It says his high-tech nano-chips will be implanted in Australia, disappearing cash under a plan floated by Michael Andrews. It says, speaking to the Courier Mail, Mr. Andrews said too much cash was being hoarded under pensioners' beds and stockpiled as a trusted currency in China. It says estimates the size of Australia's so-called black economy vary from 23 billion to 50 billion. It says the government claims tax avoidance through cash payments cost the budget up to 10 billion in revenue, money that could go towards funding welfare and other services. So the money they're missing out on all this cash use could be going towards other better things, as they put it. It says in the May budget, the federal government announced an extra 32 million funding for the Australian Taxation Office to fund its cash crackdown, which is expected to bring in an extra 589 million in revenue over the next 4 years. So they invested 32 million into this whole Black Economy Task Force to then weed out 589 million, is what it's saying. It says according to Mr. Andrews, who will hand down his final report in October, there should be 14 $100 notes for every adult in Australia, but there are fewer than that in circulation. It says while criminals prefer $50 notes, as the Reserve Bank pointed out in defense of cash last year, it says foreign migrants and pensioners prefer hundreds. So to give it like this, there's more information below. But here we go. The idea of the retirees, pensioners, those of the older class that have worked all their life, the idea that they're going to hold money now and save a little bit outside of the financial institutions and in the banks is of concern to them because they don't know how much people are holding on to. And so there's not enough circling around, and there's not enough, reporting on what this money's doing and how it's being held and where it's being held at. So that leads into the whole idea of putting a chip into it. And so once they put a chip possibly into these new notes, they're going to recall in the old notes so they can basically say, okay, we know that, such and such over on this side of town is sitting on a large sum of cash. So we know it's there. Then we know who has what, where. So it basically just makes you less, gives you less privacy because they know what's in your pocket. So that's something to consider as being very infringing upon your rights and your liberty. But that's what governments are here to do, it seems like nowadays. And then the very last article here is Australia's $100 note to be tracked to help fight organized crime and cash for work economy. So give you an idea what's going on here. It says tax guru and barrister Michael Andrew has outlined the controversial option plus a proposal for an expiry date on the currency. So now he's saying another option in this paper is that these notes or $100 note will expire. So you have to spend it or turn it in or put it to good use, or you may lose its purchasing power. And it says exclusive interview News Corp Australia. Mr. Andrew, appointed by the federal government to the Black Economy Task Force in December, revealed Chinese citizens were taking Australia 100 notes back to their homeland. It says he also pointed the finger at Australian pensioners, saying too many were hiding more money under their bed to escape the assets test. It says over the coming days, it says outlining the changes and some of the solutions. We tend to be at home more and also use more power, which means that. Here's a video if you're interested in reading more about that. It says over the coming days, News Corp will outline the challenges and some of the solutions to the estimated 40-50 billion cash economy, costing a budget about 10 billion. Scroll down some more. Here we have, it says crime gangs prefer $50 notes and foreign immigrants, the $100 note. It says, I'm working with the Reserve Bank and Australia to get a better understanding of where our notes are. And clearly there's a section of this has to be organized crime. One of the options we would like to put in an expiration date on these notes. You could put a trace on some of these notes to see where they are going. You can use nanotechnology to put little chips, and so you could then trace it. He said there is needed to be a cultural shift in Australia. So now it's called a cultural shift. So basically, they're needing people to get used to the idea that cash is no longer good. You no longer really need cash when you can just use your card or use any other digital payment method where it can be completely transparently traced and the authorities can keep an eye on where those digits are going. And so this whole culture shift in Australia is kind of, the opening the flood doors for more governments to kind of impose this type of lingo into our vocabulary to get us thinking that cash is not really something that's beneficial for our nation. This is kind of what's happening in the news down in Australia with the idea that, cash, according to, as Mr. Michael Andrews said, is it's no longer a good thing for the citizens to have in their hands because they can't really keep track of it. And it's time for a cultural shift in how we view cash. And this all plays into the idea of a cashless society and just the signs of the idea of the fiat currencies. Government issued paper that is not backed by anything is becoming a threat to the governments in of themselves because people are not spending them, they're saving them, and that is not good for our monetary system. Being that people don't spend, no consumption is taking place, then the economy doesn't spend, and there's no debt being created anymore. So that's the problem. So that's gonna start in Australia as well as in India, and all the developed nations will kind of feel this pinch. And then being that the Federal Reserve note or the dollar is the world reserve currency, it's just a matter of time for all these issues begin to touch here in the United States, where they're brought into question on shifting our mindset on how the Federal Reserve note is received. And if you're holding on to 50 and 100s here as well, you could be considered a very unpatriotic citizen, being that you're trying to, I guess, protect your assets, protect your income, and things of that nature outside the banking system. So these are all things that's happening right now in the news that I thought was worth sharing with you. And then also I wanted to comment on the idea of someone commented the other day about the dollar and how it's been under a lot of pressure lately in regards to its value on the VIX being down substantially over the last couple of weeks or so. And so my own thought is, with that is that there's no real future in a Federal Reserve note. So I'm not surprised that the dollar, the Federal Reserve note, is down right now, because at the end of the day, the purchasing power of the dollar will reach zero and then sub-zero. And the question I want to pose to everybody else is, what happens when it hits sub-zero, or right when it breaks the breaking point and goes to the point where it's not something that people want to keep in their possession anymore, and confidence and trust in that piece of paper is lost. And that's the point right there where the paper is going to start changing hands a lot fast, and the velocity is going to pick up, and people will begin to really understand what the dangers rather of what fiat currency that's not backed by anything other than confidence and government promises what it's really worth, which is zero, unfortunately. So that's just my little 2 cents on the whole idea of the Federal Reserve note being under pressure. I'm not surprised at all, because eventually it will return to its original value, which is zero. So it's just a matter of how it will impact us as far as purchasing power being lost, and then inflation picking up, where our daily lives and cost of living becomes extremely expensive, and it becomes noticeable and obvious that the Federal Reserve note was a problem all along. So other than that, hope all is well. Let me know your thoughts below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this whole idea of this nano chip in the currency. Could it be something that happens here in the US? Only time will tell. But until then, look forward to bringing you more news. Thanks.